Hi, I'm Valerie Miner, the coordinator of professional development and mentoring, and this is KU session 031. I'm sorry, is my teaching interrupting you? So, what we're going to be talking about is kind of classroom management and a little bit of student engagement, developing relationships in the secondary classroom. So, we're going to start first with our objective and with kind of the four kind of 5 areas that we're gonna be looking at today. So our objective, obviously, you are here because you want your kids to act right in class, right? And it's not about having pages and pages or slides and slides of rules and procedures, but it is about kind of these 4 main things. So number 1, you hear it all the time, developing relationships with your students. You know them, they know you, you're gonna have a lot less behavior issues. Number two, I think equally as important is engaging your students. So students who are engaged and who are interested in what you're doing in class, they're not going to misbehave. But I always say idle teenagers are scary. So we want to make sure that we're keeping them busy and engaged during the time that we have them in class. Coming up with consistency, with plans, with routines that they do so that they kind of know what to expect each day in class. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the physical environment of our classrooms and how that can actually affect classroom behavior and just kind of the comfort level of the students in our class. There's always exceptions to the rule. So we'll talk a little bit about challenging behaviors. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that because a lot of times those are case by case basis, but we will touch on that just a bit today as well. So let's start first with relationships. I have a couple of things here. You might have seen the TED Talk. I like to show it to our first year teachers every year by Rita Pearson. Every child needs a champion. So she talks all about how human connection is the key. One of my favorite things she says is, "You were chosen to be in my class. You are supposed to be here, and we make the best group." Teaching and learning should bring joy. Everyone in the classroom, not every day, all the time, should be joyful, but students should be enjoying what you're doing. You should be enjoying what you're doing and be able to share that with your students. I also love how she says, "This job is tough. We can do it. We were born to make a difference." But really, think about it. Every child deserves an adult that will never give up on them. Sometimes it's their parents, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's that one teacher that makes that connection. Another source that we looked at when we were kind of pulling some things together for this session is the book by Marcia Tate called Shouting Won't Grow Dendrites. So you might be familiar with her book, Worksheets Won't Grow Dendrites, all about engaging students. This book really just goes into kind of classroom management strategies. And just ways that you can develop relationships with students and that you can kind of get your classroom running the way that you need to. So it's a great resource. I highly recommend it. But a couple of things that she mentions as far as relationships is opening and closing each day in your class with a positive statement. Have a great day. You're loved in this classroom. Greeting them at the door. I know a lot of campuses, that's a big thing. You stand at the door and you greet your students. That makes a big difference. You see those videos of the teachers doing those specific greetings for their students, for some of the younger students as well. Um, but just keeping that positive, kind of beginning and ending. I know that there's a teacher that one of my personal children had that just say, "Okay, what are 3 things that you like about yourself? Let's go through those right now. What are 3 things that you're grateful for?" So kind of starting that, starting your days and ending your days positively. Um, Again, kind of talking about the door greeting. If the student is knows when they come in the class that you're happy that they're there and you're making that effort, maybe it'll make a difference in how they behave during your class. Maybe you're the first one that said, "Hey, I'm happy that you're here today." Um, Getting to know your kids. So when you look at your roster, you look at the kids, maybe on that first day, say, "This is going to be a great year. They gave me every student I asked for." Make them feel like I wanted you in my class. A little trick that I did when I was in the classroom is I would make notes of little traits about the students. Maybe they're a soccer player, maybe they're on the cheerleading squad, maybe they're in the band, it's something that they're interested in. So, I could always use that to make connections as we were working through the year. Obviously, getting to know their names was always important too at the beginning of the year. Another thing is just allowing them a little bit of picture into to your personal life to help them make those connections for themselves. So things that you might be comfortable sharing about your family, about your interests, things like that, that's going to help them make that connection as well. Again, getting to know the specific things about your students, maybe writing positive notes on their paper when possible. I know that my AP biology students loved stickers. So whenever I had an opportunity, if they said something great in class, I'd put a little gold star sticker on their notebook. If they, turned in some really great work, they could get a sticker on there or a stamp. They always loved that, even my high school kids. And of course, as we've talked about so many times, especially in Inspire Academy, it's important that you start to build that community right at the beginning of the year. So it's okay to spend, the first day or so just getting to know your kids, getting to know your students, building that community in your classroom, coming up with some community builder games. We have actually on our on-demand site, we actually have a community builder little mini micro session under the Inspire Academy section. So you could always look through that and kind of get some ideas for different community builders. Let them know right off the bat, you know what, you are supposed to be in my class and I expect the best from you. Um, and we're going to go into this a little bit later, but remembering that students are not here to just misbehave in your class. Um, they maybe just need a little bit of reteaching on how behavior is supposed to look in your class. So maybe treat misbehavior and behavior expectations just as you would if they didn't understand an academic concept in your classroom. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I want you to take just a minute, pause the video, and reflect a little bit. What are some relationship strategies that maybe you want to use in your classroom? What are some things that were a success for you this year? Maybe some things that you want to try to do a little bit better for next year? And what ideas do you have to build community and relationship with your students? So I do have an answer garden here that you're welcome to go to see answers from others who have gone through this session, or you can just reflect on your own. So go ahead and pause the video and reflect just for a minute. All right, welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about engagement. So, in general, for the most part, when students are interested in what they're doing, they're not going to misbehave, whether you're talking about your kids at home or you're talking about your kids in school. I know my two children at home, when they get bored, that's when things start to get a little bit hairy at the house. Same thing in a classroom. If your students are not interested and engaged, they don't see the relevancy in what they're doing, especially our teenagers, our middle school and high school students, that might be the time that they have the tendency to misbehave or to do things that they know they're not supposed to do. So if we can keep them engaged really from bell to bell, and keep them interested in what we're doing in class, then you're going to have less behavior issues. So let's look here. I'm going to give you just a second to look at this cone of learning. And as I said before, I always felt this way. Idle teenagers can get a little bit scary, right? So we want to add some kind of novelty to the classroom. But looking at this cone of learning, you can see that when they talk and when they are doing something, they're getting the most learning or the most retention. So it's okay to allow your kids to talk and work in groups and move around. They don't always have to be doing that, but it's when they're going to make their deepest connections. So just assigning them a chapter and saying, "Okay, read the chapter, and you'll have a test over it." Um, they're only going to remember about 10% of it if they don't have an opportunity to really dig into and talk about and do something with that material. Not only that, our teenagers aren't going to want to sit for 90 minutes and read, right? So maybe give them a little bit of a reading passage, and then let's get them maybe a couple, throw in some Avid strategies to help them dig into and process that reading that they're doing. But a couple of things to think about incorporating into your classroom if you don't already is, movement. And hopefully next year we'll be back to kind of business as usual. And so our students are going to be able to move around, work in groups. You could do a huddle up exercise, you could do four corners, getting them out of their desks. Because just imagine just sitting for 8 or 9 hours a day in every single class period without being able to have the opportunity to move around. That can be really tough, right? I always felt like the students gained energy as the day went on, whereas I would lose energy. It's because they were sitting all day. So, how can we get them up and moving? Working together, collaborating. I asked my second grader, what is your favorite thing to do when you're learning? And she's like, I like to work with my friends. I like to talk to my friends and kind of help me do my work or to talk through that in her second grade language, obviously. Giving students a little bit of choice on how maybe they show you their learning. Maybe they want to draw, maybe they want to write something, maybe they want to just talk to you about it. Maybe giving them a choice and allowing them to make connections. What is that? How is this relevant to me? Why does this matter to me? And then kind of thinking through brain friendly instruction strategies, right? So, Marcia Tate, to kind of go back to her, she says, and I quote, just because you have their eyes doesn't mean you have their brains all the time, right? So, kind of thinking through, they might be looking at you, but their brain might be going 1,000 miles a minute. Just because we're in an AP class in high school, it doesn't mean that students have to learn through a class long lecture. There's so many other ways to engage our students. And I know the argument is we're preparing them for college. And a lot of college classes do sit there and lecture, right? But let's give them that opportunity to really think critically for themselves. So if they are sitting in that hour long or hour and a half long lecture in college, they can then use the skills that they've learned in our classes to think critically and be able to make those deeper connections, maybe when they're working with a collaborative group outside of class. So thinking too, how can you add maybe a little bit of humor? Allowing your students to talk. For me, when I walk into a classroom and it's silent, or whenever my classroom was silent, it just felt eerie to me. I like to have buzz and noise and conversation happening. And it's not 100% always on topic, right? But when you're walking around and you're hearing and you actually hear the students kind of digging into that academic conversation, it's pretty awesome. Um, Adding that movement in. Something else interesting is like novelty. So maybe changing your delivery every once in a while. It kind of helps make a little bit more brain connections, kind of keep them guessing on what they'll be doing to engage in their learning that day. If they don't know, oh, well, today we're going to take notes and then we're going to read the book and then we're going to do a worksheet. We do this every day. They're just going to kind of go through the motions. But if they don't really know what you're going to have them do that day, it adds just a little bit of novelty. So just a couple of things to think about when you're thinking about engaging your students. I guarantee you up that engagement, that behavior issues go down. Okay, so think through a little bit with engagement. So, how did you do last year in engaging your students? And what's your upcoming plan for this year to gain and maintain their attention during a lesson? So go ahead and pause the video and jot that down. All right, so let's talk a little bit about consistency, plans, and routines. We can't assume, even if we have seniors in high school, that they know what's expected of them. And so, we don't want to spend the first day of school going over 40 slides of rules and expectations, but we do have to spend the time to teach and reteach our students on proper behavior and procedures to kind of help that class run effectively because we don't want those things getting in the way. So we can't just assume they know what they need to do, but we don't want to kill them on the first day with those slides, right? So how do we have to kind of think about how can we teach those procedures as they're doing them? And then when we have a student that gets a little bit mixed up, how do we then reteach that? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Todd Tennell, who used to be a principal in the district, but I've gotten some nuggets from him. And this was something he always said. He always said, teaching is discipline and discipline is teaching. So we can kind of think of it in the same way. And this is what I was referring to earlier. So let's just say that you are a math teacher and you teach your students how to solve for X, and a student solves for X appropriately. Well, if they do it appropriately, then there's no reteaching needed. They're good to go. They know what they need to do, they know the steps they need to take, and bam, they're good. But what if a student solves for X inappropriately? Well, you're not going to be like, oh, you need to go to the office or you have to go out into the hall because you solved for X inappropriately, right? That sounds kind of silly. So we just have to reteach them. We have to go over it again, maybe talk about it a different way, show them a different example. So I challenge you to think about student behavior in the same way. So let's say the students understand what they need to do, they have the instructions, and the student follows the instructions. They do what they need to do. No issues, right? So no reteaching needed. We can just move on with our business. But let's say that one of your students doesn't follow instructions and doesn't do what they need to do. instead of saying, "Oh, you didn't do what you needed to do. I can't believe you're doing this. Off to the hall you go," or "You have detention," or "You have to stick with me during lunch," or whatever it might be, maybe we just reteach them. Maybe we say it in a different way. So remember, this is what we are supposed to be doing, right? Now, obviously, if you have a student that's doing this 17 times just for fun, then that's when we have to intervene a little bit differently. But maybe they just don't remember what they're supposed to do or what those expectations are, or maybe they're testing you to see is that, are they going to stay consistent with what they've told me it's going to be? Let's kind of think on that a little bit. Could you approach that a little bit differently? So I would argue that there's kind of three things that we need to be able to teach in what I'm calling the behavior curriculum. So students need to know how to follow directions. They need to know how to accept criticism, like, hey, you didn't do what you needed to do. Let's fix it. And they need to learn how to accept no for an answer. Now, if I could teach my 13-year-old to accept no for an answer, life would be great, right? No more just one, just please, just one. Always trying to get past there. Um, so if you think about it, these really could be kind of the only three rules in your class because almost everything can fit within these three rules. Maybe you want to add something about, respect and community and things like that. But these be kind of your three main rules. So, like I said, we can call this the behavior curriculum. So, if a student doesn't do what they need to do, they're not following directions, or they didn't accept no for an answer, you could kind of use this as a script. And when we do this together, a lot of times we'll do this conversation during an Inspire Academy session. We actually practice the script. So the first thing you want to do is just approach the child positively, just like you would do if they didn't understand a concept you were working on in class. And so you follow the script. Just now, and describe the inappropriate behavior. Just now, you threw paper across the room. Okay. The next time, then you want to describe what you would like them to do. So, next time, I would like for you to get up and walk to the trash can and put the paper in the trash can instead of throwing it across the room. Okay. The next, when you and you give some sort of rationale. So, when you throw paper across the room, it distracts everybody's learning and we're all kind of have to pause and we're not able to get through what we need to get through so that you don't have homework for the afternoon or something along those lines. Um, if you don't do what you need to do, you administer some consequences and you want to make sure those consequences kind of fit the crime, right? Or the misbehavior. So if they're throwing paper, maybe they have to come back and pick up trash in the room, or before they leave your class that day, they have to make the rounds and pick up trash in the room. But sometimes the consequence can just be having to have a conversation with you, right? And you don't have to stop class. So if a student's throwing paper across the room and you're in the middle of a lesson, you don't have to stop and have this conversation with them right then. You can acknowledge it, do what you need to do to quickly intervene at a low stakes level, and then, have that conversation once everybody's kind of gotten to work on, the activity that they have for the day or whenever you're done teaching that full group lesson. But just them knowing they're going to have that conversation with you might be consequence enough, depending on the student and the situation. But then the next important piece is the next time you see them doing something good in class, you want to praise them and reward them with whatever reward system you might have in your classroom. And maybe that reward system is just, you're being positive with them. But, you've always heard 5 positives for every negative. So you definitely want to make sure that you continue to build that child up after you've had to have an intervention like this. So just a strategy that you might want to try for some of those lower stake behavior issues that are in your classroom. Really just approach it like you would reteach any of your content. Okay, so again, let's reflect a little bit. What are the specific rituals or procedures? What are some things that you need to have in place to effectively manage your classroom? What are some non negotiables for you? So take a couple of minutes again, pause the video and reflect. What are some things that you need to put into place for next year that maybe you could put in the behavior curriculum, that maybe you could think through how would you reteach your students when they don't do what they need to do? So go ahead and pause the video and reflect on that. All right, as you're coming back, let's talk a little bit about classroom environment. So, of course, I made a little Bitmoji classroom, um, just to kind of show or highlight some of the fun things that we can look at. It is very addicting to make these Bitmoji classrooms still. So, when we're thinking about our physical environment, sometimes when we think about our actual classrooms, we realize that they're not really set up for success for our students. So, how can we kind of tweak that physical environment? The first issue with the classrooms is the lighting. So, fluorescent lights can actually kind of overstimulate. They can be a little bit harmful. And I think most of us know that. So, you'll see on my little Bitmoji classroom, I have just kind of a different type of lamp, a couple of them. When I was in the classroom, I had a couple lamps. I realized or noticed that my students were a lot calmer when I didn't have the big fluorescent lights on. If you're lucky enough to have a window, maybe opening it up so that you have some of that natural light coming in. Um, oh, I know candles are a big no-no, but that would be a great lighting scheme too, as well. Um, Thinking too about different aromas, although you do have to be careful with that, can actually help reduce stress, like lavender and things like that as well. Music, not only does it help make brain connections, but can actually calm students down. And I'm not necessarily talking about allowing them to listen to music in their headphones, but maybe every once in a while, you have music going in the classroom. Now, we do have to be sensitive about those students that need the quiet to focus. But maybe if you're trying to pump up students before a test, you could play something like "We Are the Champions." Um, Maybe when you're trying to relax them, you could play some relaxing music. Vitamin String Quartet is kind of fun to play, maybe during breaks or during transitions. Maybe as they're starting the day, as they're doing their warm up, you could have kind of some calming jazz, or as they're entering the room. Just kind of, different thing about different ways that you can incorporate music into your classroom. And then just another thing to think about are the colors. And so I chose this kind of teal background. Now, these desks are definitely a bright orange, which can be kind of an excited and motivated type of color, but blues and greens and earth tones kind of provide a more relaxing environment. You can actually get these little pastel colored acetate sheets to put on top of textbooks or really bright white paper to kind of help students improve their focus. Using color as they're making kind of learning connections can also help make brain connections as well. So color calls attention to crucial notes. It makes them easier for the brain to recall. So the use of color can help with engagement, but also with kind of the general overall feel of your classroom. So kind of think about your class right now, your classroom, and kind of list out some things. So pause the video, list out some things that you would want to change or add to your class to enhance that physical environment to make it just a little more welcoming and inviting for your students. Okay. So, kind of the last main thing I want to talk about is that it's not personal, right? So, these babies are not waking up each morning with their sole mission to make you cry or frustrate you. Some of them may just have issues that they don't know how to cope with, or strategies that they haven't been able to learn how to deal with. I mean, they're just kids, right? Their frontal cortex is not fully developed, so they might need a little bit of help with that. We're the adults, we're the ones that are fully developed. So we're the ones that need to kind of help them navigate this situation. Maybe they have other emotional situations that we are not aware of that they are not equipped to handle. So we have to try to remember that it's not personal. It's not a personal attack on you as a teacher or an individual if a student is misbehaving or you have constant behavior issues. Um, you can definitely start with using all the tools that we've discussed today that helps provide that engagement, that routine, where a lot of these students need that routine. If they have kind of a out of control home life, having that routine at school can be very helpful for them. Staying consistent, making it all about behavior and not the personal child themselves. These aren't going to fix the situation, especially if it's a huge, personal issue or home issue, or, they have something like ADHD or a behavior disorder. It's not going to fix it, but it can help curb those opportunities for misbehavior. Um, We always want to make sure that we're documenting if we have a consistent challenging behavior. And contrary to popular belief, it is totally 100% okay and encouraged to reach out for help. So, if you're a new teacher, reach out to your mentor. It's okay. Your administrators want to help you. They're equipped to help you if you're having constant issues. Campus coaches, behavioral specialists, the counselor on your campus. So, as you're documenting those behaviors, start talking with some other resources on your campus before it escalates out of hand. It's not a failure to seek help and advice from others. It's a failure when you suffer alone and you don't seek that help. Even the most experienced teacher might need to get some assistance if there's an ongoing behavior. So it's okay to ask for help. If you hear nothing else today, I hope you hear that. Okay, so let's kind of think through what we've talked about in this session. I made this little Among Us map to a well managed classroom. Remember, it all boils really down to knowing your students, even if you have consistent behavior issues. If you know that student and you're making connections with that student, that's going to help your issues. Like I said, it's not going to fix it 100%, but it's definitely going to help. Keeping those students engaged, giving them relevant things to work on in their class or to discuss, and don't be afraid to allow them to move and get up and collaborate. Don't be afraid to have a classroom that's productively noisy. That's okay. We don't want quiet classrooms. How boring is that, right? Um, so, and then again, remembering that it's not personal. If a student's misbehaving, it's not because they don't like you. It's not personal. They may just not have the tools to know what to do. So, kind of remembering those big things. And you might notice I actually have relationships on here twice. That's how important they are. But you can always go back and pause this and check out this little fancy map of a well managed classroom. And as always, never hesitate to reach out if you need any assistance. We are always here and happy to help you as we can. Thank you so much for attending our session.